Week 8, and that's starting a new stage, framing your opportunity and ideation. Now we're not going to start ideating. You may have had some ideas along the way, but until we have our framing and our directions for design and why we're going that direction and what part of the project we're designing, we won't start ideation in earnest. So I think we have 3 or 4 weeks for this stage. There's plenty of time. You can continue your research as you frame things up. Why? Because the Catalyst approach, equity-centered design, is an iterative approach. You're constantly trying to learn, share what you're learning with others, getting feedback, iterating, and moving forward. Okay, let's do it. So let's talk about how to frame your opportunity. So what is framing a problem? Is that a new term for you guys? Have you heard this before? Like, how are you framing that, right? Well, the simplest example I could think of, and I think it's, many people are familiar with it, is you could say the glass is half empty, but you can also say the glass is half full. And depending on which one you do, you frame the situation or the problem or the opportunity in a different light. And so think about that. That's what you're doing for your project, is how are you describing the experience of people, their needs, and the considerations? How are you framing that so your team can move forward with ideas and designing for it? So we don't have a simple phrase like the glass is half full, which is a positive framing of having half a glass of water. You're framing your project in a structured way to describe what you learned and what needs to be addressed in a solution. So you're not doing everything you learned. We did this, we talked to people, blah, 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 they said this and this, and you're actually distilling it into a much smaller set of information so that when you communicate it to people, they can go, okay, that's what's needed. All right, let's get to work on solving it, right? So this is the primary first audience for this is the design team, is the solution team. Your team, the people you're working with to have ideas, collaborating with, co-creating with, community members who you're bringing into the process. The framing helps people understand where you are in terms of attacking using your creativity to attack the problem. You can't solve everything that you found, and you're not gonna, and there's many different ways to approach it. So this is helping you frame up how you're gonna approach it. So the content you use in problem framing is all the stuff you've been collecting and creating and will continue to collect and create. So the content in a problem framing document or report or presentation, you include the people you're designing for. Who are we designing for? Remember, we have both the individuals we interviewed, and then we have this abstraction called a persona. So you're characterizing who you're designing for. You're characterizing the experience you're designing for. So we have a journey map for that, right? You're distilling from your research key themes and topics. Remember, one of our first exercises was to say, what are our top 10 takeaways so far? If you did that top 10 takeaways, that was a first distillation, maybe a first try at having some key themes and topics. You also describe those specific problems and needs under the themes or topics. So a topic might have 3 or 4 things you're looking at. And you use supporting evidence and examples from your research to say, I'm not just making this up, here's a community member talking about that issue right here. And you have a little video about them. And then you also make some directional statements about we should consider doing this, this, and this in our solution, right? So you have some design criteria and suggestions for a solution direction, right? Not necessarily the specific ideas, but maybe one of your outcomes would be like, so we should consider creating a strong a repeatable data framework for doing it. It's not the specific idea for a data framework, but you're suggesting that you should consider that given what your research shows about your project topic. Okay, so these are all very tangible and visual things that you bring into a problem framing, and that's what you're trying to do in a problem framing, is bring it alive for others so that they can work on it and design to it. So let me give you a quick example. So what I'm about to share is a project we did, I think 17 years ago, 17 or 18 years ago. And it was with a breast pump manufacturer and program company, and one of the leaders, Medela, and they were looking at how to make the experience of breast pumping better for mothers, right? And they're a leader, and they have their breast pumps in many hospitals, and it's one of the first ones that are introduced, et cetera. But they were wondering, how can we make this better, looking at it from the mother's experience rather than they're a very technology-oriented company, and historically they looked at it from technology. So I'm going to show you I'm not going to show you the whole document. I'm going to show you how we pulled together a framing of the opportunity before we started ideation. So this happened probably 6 to 8 weeks into the project, right where you guys are in your project, okay? So who do we have? We recruited mothers who were actively pumping. I think we had roughly 8 to 12 mothers. So this is one page. This is in the framing document. Here we're not using personas, we're using the specific people we spoke with and a little profile of them. And we did open-ended show and tell interviews. And this is Christy sharing a little bit. I'm going to play like 20 seconds of this, 30 seconds of this. This is Christy talking about how she pumps in her car in the parking lot of her work because they didn't have lactation facilities, unfortunately. So it's a little dark, don't mind that. It's a little dark because they're in their garage doing the interview at night. But she has her baby on her lap and she's talking about how she uses that pump. So just listen to what the kinds of things she's talking about, and listen that the interviewer isn't saying anything. They just leave that open space for the person to speak into and keep telling them about their experience. Okay, let's see. Hopefully we have sound.
I don't know, it's not the speed, it's the way the pump works when it's connected in the car. So even if I had this all the way at the minimum, it still is working faster than if I had it at the minimum inside. You know, it's almost like, you know, when it's suctioning, it's doing quicker pulls, if that makes any sense. Like, okay, if I adjust this and I'm using it inside the house, what I notice is that the strength of the pull is different. So, but it seems to be pretty much, I don't notice that it's going faster or slower as it's suctioning, but what I will notice is that it hurts very much if you're at the maximum versus, you know, at the minimum or whatever.
Okay, so that was a really short snippet, but you can see how she's starting to describe one aspect, and this interview is probably an hour long. And another part of the interview, she turns it on, and it is so loud, it goes, ring! And the interviewer jumps a little bit and goes, oh my gosh, I never thought it was going to be that loud. And so what you learn in these interviews starts to give you insights. You start to break them up into little pieces of information about pump. You heard her talk about pumping inside the car, and it's different. The same unit is different when she has it plugged into her car than when she plugs in it inside her home. So there's interesting things there about place, et cetera. Okay, so those were interviews. We're starting to pull those things out. Now we have what matters most at a high level. So this was just in the document, and we said that like there's 4 things that really matter. The production of milk for their child. They will sacrifice everything to provide for their kid. Like that was the highest priority. So they put up with things like sound and pain and frustration in order to provide for their kid. And you need to understand that that's the motivating goal of the mother. The time, they want their time back to spend time with their kid, to spend more time with their family, to get back to work. So the time is a huge issue, and they want things that make pumping more convenient, more time effective, etc. Okay, I'm not going to describe all of this, but activity and privacy. And then we had a journey map. And this journey map is specific to breast pumping. And you can see how it goes from, let me see if I can highlight a little bit. During pregnancy, so we're thinking about breast pumping. How do they learn about it? When do they start thinking about it? How do they learn how to use it, how to do it, right? There's a whole ramp up before you even get into the process of doing it. Now, the rest of the journey here is pumping, but only, whoops, go back, only this bottom part, actually I can point to it, only this bottom part is the actual pumping. The rest of this is getting set up and cleaning up and organizing things and carrying and transport. And so what we realized in doing this journey map and speaking with the mothers is how little of the overall effort and frustration is actually in the pumping side of it, and it's everything that surrounds it. Okay, so again, laying the groundwork in this framing document of what it's like and what matters to mothers. Okay. We also brought in other diagrams. So you heard her talking about inside the car, at home. Other women talked about pumping at work. And so we have this little table with what women are describing on one side of the characteristics of those things, and then the situation at home, work, and the car. And you can see visually from this diagram that home has the most and the best attributes, clearly, which is kind of obvious in retrospect. But it really outlines the different things that matter in an environment. Remember I said places matter in our research elements. So here, place is a very specific thing because women have to pump at work, in the car. Sometimes if they don't accommodate them at work, they go out to their car in the parking lot. It's crazy. So other diagrams that we bring into this framing to help the design team understand what matters. Okay. And then finally, we take kind of the bulk of the interview information that we've created, that we've turned into themes or topics, and we just lay out a document with a page or two for each one of these areas that matter. So in this case, it was planning, preparing to pump, pumping, milk management, and gear. And you can see it has elements of the journey map, but it's not an articulation of all the steps in the journey map. It's kind of and it includes this category called gear, which is about what the design thing should be like, because there's so many things involved in it. Okay, so then we would have a page or two for each one of these topics, pulling in pictures, quotes, and describing that specific topic. And you'll see this pattern over and over when you do this kind of work, that you're describing the project's context and the things that matter most. Okay, so here's the planning spread, page 1, page 2. And if you look at this page, I just want to do an anatomy of this page real quick. What do we have? At the top, we have a quote that's meant to stand out, that somebody can read. If I want to be as ready as I can to pump, I want to be as ready as I can to pump, so I'm not wasting any time. Again, there's that time thing. And so they want to be ready, so that's why it's in the planning section, right? And it's not critical that everything is perfectly in tune with every topic and everything fits like a puzzle. These are general categories with information that you're trying to tell a story of what matters. So what's below that? Pictures, the topics, subtopics, so carrying to a pumping location, getting settled, and setting up the pump. So you can see that that's 3 little pieces of the journey. And you're talking a little bit about them below that with the description. And then these darker areas on the bottom, this one right here, is a consideration. That's the design direction. So consider color-coded parts and pump connections that will help the setup task be very efficient. You see how? Consider color-coded parts. So you're just suggesting what they might think about as they're putting this new design together. So at the top, we have a quote. We have subtopics and names with a picture. We have the short description of the subtopic, and we have design considerations. So this is a really simple way to set up a page where you're describing one of the core topics or themes from your research. And here's another example. We do use that same structure on the next topic. This one was milk management, right? Same thing. Pictures are different, subtopics are different, considerations are different because it's a different aspect of the user experience that you're trying to describe and share. Okay, so I showed you that from a real project. Now I want to talk more specifically about how to create it for your own project. And I have another example that I'm going to do that with, but you have from your research lots of topics, insights, quotes, ideas, whatever they are. You have a lot of things that you're starting to become overwhelmed with. But now it's time to start bringing those into categorized topics and say, what do we think matters? And you're doing this in collaborative cycles with your team. And here's what we did when we had all of these, a bunch of data coming back from the field, from people who are transitioning from the hospital to their home, right? So this was an example we did with CCI for the Safety Net Innovation Network to try to show them how to use user research or how to involve clients and patients in your work so you get insights on how to better serve them. So what is the experience like? So we had people take pictures and share stories once or twice a day for a couple weeks about how things were going, what was happening. And they would take a picture of what they were involved with, maybe taking medication, figuring out how to go see their doctor again, all the different things that they're doing. And we got hundreds of these pictures with stories together. So this is our raw data, right? This is the stuff coming back from our research. We simply sorted those into topic areas. And in this case, you can see they bubbled up to coordinating my care because you're seeing different doctors, pain management, managing medications, managing life, the economic side, and my emotional well-being, behavioral health. So 6 categories in this case. There was a lot of data. And what I want to say about this notion of bubbling things up is, and structuring it this way, it gives you an ability to say, will we or will we not, or should we not, address this aspect in our solution? Often, we'll present a set of topics like this and say, look, we're only going to be dealing with coordinating care and managing medications. We're not going to deal with these other areas in our solution. And that's perfectly okay. Just because you found areas that need help doesn't mean you have to be the ones that solve it or address it in this stage of the project. And in fact, what we encourage people to do is to focus on one of these and say, how can we make a good solution in this area? If we're successful with it, we can always add on and build up our solution to address more areas if appropriate. So from those topics and kind of the general feel of all the interviews, there was a theme of the overall project, which is going from starting in the hospital, having an incident in your life where you have to be in the hospital, and then transitioning from that care back home. There's a ton of uncertainty. There's the questions galore. It kind of manifests everywhere and in every one of these topics. So this is just a high-level theme at the highest level of the project. But going back down to the topics, now we start detailing these topics. So we pull out coordinating care, and we say, what do we mean by that? Why did that bubble up as a topic or theme? What's in the sticky notes or the ideas that we, the content and the data that we sorted? What's in there, and how can we describe this? In this case, they used 3 quotes to describe this area. I believe doctors, nurses, patient caregivers should all come together to make key decisions regarding a patient's discharge plan. So this is about coordinating care so that you're not getting 6 different assumptions about what happens when you leave the hospital. Okay, so we detail a topic. And then we bring in pictures, specific quotes from people, and kind of highlight those in a report or in a presentation in that coordinating care area. See how that works? So what you basically do when you're structuring this qualitative data and trying to frame your problem is you start with lots of points, and it's a simple process of categorizing, naming, and describing these, and then putting them together in a structured presentation, poster, document that allows people to get in there and understand what's going on. And along with your design recommendations, we're going to, maybe here we're going to deal with, like I said before, coordinating care and managing medications. You can, in your framing document said this is what we're doing with, and therefore these are the considerations we have for solutions already from our research. But let's move into ideation. Okay. So I'm throwing a lot at you, but I want you to just realize that it's a simple categorization process that you've been practicing in your collaborative cycles to date. Okay. And remember that this middle part is kind of the Goldilocks area for solution directions. So if you were just looking at all the points, you couldn't make sense of it because there's just too much detail. There's no structure to it. One person thinks one thing's important, somebody else thinks something else is important. So you have all these points. On the other end of the unifying idea of uncertainty, that gives you a sense of a main theme, but you can't design for that because what are the specifics? And that's where this area in the middle is so important, right? The handful of topics that you structure your presentation around or your framing around, and the detail you give and the considerations you give is the core of the framing. So it's a structured way to describe what you learned and what needs to be addressed in a solution. Again, you're doing it for the design team or the solution team and a range of stakeholders who want to hear about what's going on and understand that problem. And this framing of your problem is going to be valuable beyond your project because it can deliver new information to the organization that they never knew about that particular project context. This happened to us all the time. We would have these types of framing reports before we got into the design and the ideation. And it would be used by the client for multiple years afterwards. They would have that as a reference. That's how powerful these documents can be when you provide clarity to a project context. So I really want to encourage you to think about this as having value beyond your project as well. And that's how interesting it can be. And remember, the parts come from the work you've been doing. So it's not whole new work. It's really dealing with the stuff you've been collecting from the people you've been talking with, the journey map you're going to make, the the topic areas that come out of it, and then the videos that you've been taking or the audio recordings or the pictures. All of these very tangible things can bring your problem framing to life so people understand it easily and they feel motivated. Here's the other thing about good project framing. People feel motivated then to solve it because you've made clear what needs to be done. That's very different than proposing an idea where people are like, well, have you really looked at this? Have you considered that? When you do a good problem framing, people are like, holy cow, those are some urgent needs. Let's work on that. And so the project has momentum and continues. Okay, so that's project framing.